Crisis in Venezuela, a nationwide blackout backlash in the South American country. We'll hear from a U.S. journalist arrested and deported from Caracas. Tragedy. An Ethiopian airline Boeing jet crashes, killing more than 155 people, including members of Catholic Relief Services. The fight for a border wall. In his new proposed budget, President Donald Trump asks for billions for his signature project. And on retreat with Pope Francis, a look at how the Holy Father is spending this week and what happens to the Vatican while he's away. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 11th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Power outages turned deadly in Venezuela. The crisis-laden country reached new levels of desperation this weekend. Reports say nearly 21 people have died. Phone service is down. Food is in short supply. Residents are gathering at larger than usual numbers at natural springs to collect water. One Caracas resident says this is unbearable. The blackouts began Thursday, and as of yesterday, many areas remain without power. Finding clean water is a problem. CNN video shows people filling containers from a contaminated river. President Nicolas Maduro says the United States sabotaged the electricity grid, but opposition leader Juan Guaido says the socialist government and its mismanagement are to blame, and he says the country has collapsed. Freedom of the press is also under attack. Joining me now is Cody Weddle, a freelance journalist who was arrested and deported from Venezuela. You've worked for several publications, including Catholic News Service. Cody, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
You were arrested, detained, deported. What was the reasoning behind all of this? And how were you treated?
Well, they never explicitly said why I was arrested. I'm just assuming that it was because of some reporting I did about the current situation within Venezuela's security forces. And they are highly affected by the country's economic crisis. And I assume it was because of that reporting, and they wanted to know more about my sources or the people I spoke to. I was actually treated very well. It was clear that they were under orders not to harm me physically. I was actually never even handcuffed. The worst part of the situation, they did put a hood on me actually when I was in their headquarters. I'm not sure why, but otherwise they didn't harm me physically in any way. So physically, I wasn't hurt.
Were you scared?
I was scared. I was scared mostly about my freedom. I was scared that I could be, the country's political situation continues to intensify. So I was scared that I could be used as some type of political pawn, and could be in there for much longer, months or even years. So that was my biggest worry.
How do you see the situation playing out? As we just heard, it's been a horrific 72 hours there.
Exactly. That blackout there has been incredible, and people will have to wait and see what has really happened. And I can't imagine what's happening currently in hospitals where people need electricity for ventilators, for dialysis machines. But I'm expecting we'll really see those reports, and I think they will be devastating. But this is really something that we saw coming. Venezuela's infrastructure is collapsing. It hasn't been given proper maintenance. It hasn't been invested in, and this is the result of that.
Hence the electrical damage that we've been seeing, the blackout, right? That's because of mismanagement.
Right, exactly. Venezuela has not maintained its infrastructure. They've either not had the money or haven't wanted to invest money in their infrastructure, and this is what happens. We had already seen periodic blackouts, but it mostly hadn't affected the capital, Caracas. Now it's affecting the whole country. And I would just say this is something we saw coming.
I have to ask you, you've been deported from a country where you've been living and reporting. So how are you going to continue to follow this story? What's next for you professionally now that you can't go back?
Well, I'm still trying to iron out those details. Like you said, I was there for almost 5 years. Basically, my entire professional career was in Venezuela. So yeah, it's a huge change for me. but also who knows how the situation there is going to change in the next few months and the next year. So I plan to continue covering the story, whether that be from Colombia or in other parts, in other bordering countries, or even here in South Florida. And I plan to continue covering the story. I still just have to work out those details.
The early morning raid, was that surprising? It wasn't expected, right?
No, I mean, it wasn't expected. I actually thought it was the water guy delivering the weekly water, and that's why I actually opened the door, and there they were. So, and the water guy actually arrived 2 or 3 hours later while they were raiding my apartment, and I told him, yeah, we wouldn't be needing any water.
We don't need any water anymore. I'm sorry to laugh, but I mean, that's had to have been terribly scary. Cody Weddle, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, showing us that the press is under fire in Venezuela as well. A freelance journalist, you were arrested and deported. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
Authorities in Ethiopia, China, and Indonesia have grounded all Boeing 737 planes today following a deadly crash of an Ethiopian Airlines jetliner. Investigators are hoping to use the flight recorders to figure out why the plane went down minutes after takeoff. The crash is drawing attention from around the world, including prominent Catholic leaders. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has reaction from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. State Department officials say they are offering their condolences to the family and friends who were killed in the crash. They've offered help to Ethiopia through the U.S. Embassy there. Officials confirm 8 Americans were on board, as were victims from more than 30 other countries like China, India, Canada, Italy, Britain, France, Germany, and Egypt. 4 of the dead were staff members with Catholic Relief Services. Searchers pick their way through the scattered remains of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 for a second day, gingerly lifting from the scorched earth books, passports, and other personal items. None of the 157 passengers lived to see the aftermath. The flight that set off Sunday morning from Ethiopia's capital, bound for Nairobi, Kenya, faltered and plowed into the earth 6 minutes later. Now the Ethiopian Airlines CEO and Boeing, the company who built the plane, are facing tough questions. The 737 MAX 8 aircraft is the same model that went down in Indonesia 5 months ago, killing 189 people. Both of them were brand new. While the authorities look for clues, the families of the victims are mourning, hugging their loved ones near the Kenyan airport where the passengers were supposed to land. Many were attending a United Nations conference, which now has their flag at half-staff. Among the dead, a Catholic residential minister at Georgetown University, a live-in chaplain attending law school. In addition, 4 staff members from Catholic Relief Services, Ethiopian natives who were attending a yearly planning meeting.
Seeing, 4 staff members go down in this airplane crash was just devastating for me personally.
Sean Callahan, the president of Catholic Relief Services based in Baltimore, says the plane crash upset many of their colleagues based in Africa. He says he's received supportive messages from prominent Catholic bishops across the world. Callahan says he and his colleagues came together this morning to pray.
Just seeing the outpouring of love from their colleagues, the outpouring of love from the church internationally and from the development community, it doesn't take the pain away, but it recognizes that their lives were serving those who they wanted to serve, and that they're being recognized for the great work that they've done.
Those staff members were especially focused on providing food to the starving in Ethiopia. Today, the Vatican released a statement saying Pope Francis is praying for the repose of the souls of the victims and that God will support the family members who have lost their loved ones. Lauren?
Right, it must just be devastating for Sean and for all of Catholic Relief Services to have to go through this. Thank you so much. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department.
Flavi at Robert na nandito ngayon.
Catholic nuns in the Philippines pray for the safety of 3 priests. The priests say their lives are in danger for criticizing the country's bloody war on illegal drugs. However, Father Robert Reyes says the threats eased up after Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle notified President Duterte about them. According to the UK-based Catholic Herald, a bishop who is accused of sexual misconduct is on retreat with Pope Francis this week. The Holy Father left the Vatican yesterday afternoon. He greeted members of the Roman Curia who are with him before boarding a bus to a retreat house in Aricia, a town near Rome. They will be taking part in spiritual exercises for Lent until Friday. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, who is this bishop accused of sexual misconduct, and has the Vatican issued a statement?
Lauren, this is Bishop Gustavo Zanchetta. He's an assessor in the Vatican's APSA department, which oversees the management of properties and investments for the Holy See. Bishop Zanchetta, it was announced on January the 4th through the Vatican press office that he was abstaining from work while the Vatican reviews the case, evaluates the different elements to see if there's a case against him still. The Holy See has not made a statement today, but we did hear from the Catholic Herald that the bishop himself confirmed that he was at the retreat today.
Alan, the Pope goes on retreat every year. This year is a little different as it comes right after the major meeting on clergy sex abuse. Do you think that the abuse crisis is going to be a topic?
We don't have the details of exactly what's going to be spoken about. That's in the hands of the retreat master. We can, however, Lauren, suppose that this is on the minds of many of the people who are there present, including the Pope himself. There are more than 60 people taking part in this retreat. Many of them would have been part as heads of the different Vatican departments in that Vatican Summit for the Protection of Minors. Lent is a time for repentance, for looking back on what has been over the course of the last year since last Lent, and there's been so much that has happened. Also to brother cardinals and bishops in the world. We just think of the recent cases of the convictions of Cardinals Pell and Barbarin. This will be on their minds.
Now, you mentioned a retreat master. Who is this retreat master? Do we know anything about what he's going to be saying? I know historically officials have chosen to give retreats. Those who have been chosen have been considered people to watch.
Yeah, so this year it's a Benedictine monk from a monastery near Florence. His name is Father Abbot Francesco Maria Gianni, and he is preaching about God in the city, about lifting our gaze above the city life. He spoke of city life sometimes as a desert, and the idea is to bring about the heavenly Jerusalem here on earth through our activities and our worship of God in our cities. As you mentioned, former retreat masters have been sort of promoted after they've been given this possibility of preaching for the Pope and for the Curia. Just last year, it was a Portuguese priest who was working at a university in Portugal, and within a year of having preached the exercises, he's now the archivist and librarian within the Vatican, which is a post that has historically carried the title also of cardinal. So he's been made an archbishop, a big step for him, and obviously a lot of trust being placed in him from the Pope. We'll see if that's the case. If there's any sort of a promotion for this retreat master as well.
Well, if talking about the getting out of the city, I imagine Vatican City is going to be pretty quiet this week. Thank you so much. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Lauren.
The head of the Mormon Church tweets, "We have much in common," referring to the first ever meeting between the Pope and Mormon Church leaders. The Mormon Church says Church President Russell Nelson and Pope Francis discussed religious liberty, family, and young people. The Vatican offered no details. The audience was held a day before the dedication of the Mormon Church's large new temple in Rome. Coming up, the president's new budget is revealed with billions of dollars allocated for a border wall. We'll have a report from the White House and reaction on Capitol Hill. President Trump releases a $4.7 trillion federal budget proposal. It increases military spending and money for a border wall. It outlines plans for lowering drug costs, ending the HIV epidemic, but doesn't mention his pro-life priorities. There's a lot to break down tonight. White House correspondent Mark Irons begins our team coverage. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. We spent the day combing through the president's 2020 budget and seeing how it compares to last year's proposal. One thing that appears to be lacking is a provision to defund abortion providers. Last year's White House budget proposal included a paragraph saying the budget includes provisions prohibiting certain abortion providers from receiving federal funds from HHS, including those that receive funding under the Title X Family Planning Program and Medicaid, among other HHS programs. But after finalizing those HHS Title X rules, that language is missing from this year's proposal, and we could not find any new proposal to defund abortion providers. We did learn about a provision to support and protect religious and ethnic minorities in the Middle East. USAID says the budget will allow it to invest $150 million to assist persecuted religious and ethnic minorities recovering from the devastation caused by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations. The budget also requests more than $2 billion for life-saving programs to address maternal and child health, family planning, nutrition, malaria, neglected tropical diseases. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the budget does a whole lot more.
It continues the president's pro-job creation policies, keeps taxes low, combats the opioid epidemic, protects our veterans, defends our nation, and secures our borders.
All the president's proposals add up to a record $4.7 trillion. That would create a $1.1 trillion deficit, the highest in a decade. The proposal leads to a balanced budget in 15 years, long after President Trump leaves office.
This is a clear roadmap for a more fiscally responsible future if Congress chooses to follow it.
Presidential budgets are seen as blueprints that rarely become reality. In this case, the budget beginning October 1st sets up a showdown with Congress over priorities, including the president's increased demand for $8.6 billion to build that U.S.-Mexico border wall. Lauren?
That's where we're headed next. White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The president's budget, as he said, just a request. Lawmakers will soon question cabinet secretaries on what the president wants Congress to do. Now, Congress holds the constitutional power of the purse, and they're going to draft and vote on their own budget. That's where we find Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. He's going to share their first reactions. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The president sets up a big fight with Congress. It's just months after the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats couldn't agree on $5.7 billion the president wanted for the wall. Now he wants even more border money.
A celebrity's welcome for the president's 2020 budget proposal, called A Budget for a Better America. Promises kept, taxpayers first. But top Democrats criticized the president for wanting $8.6 billion for a border wall. At a time when our country faces challenges about jobs for the future, this money would better be spent on rebuilding America and on education and workforce development for jobs for the 21st century. Top Senate Budget Committee Democrat Bernie Sanders calls it breathtaking in its degree of cruelty. He says over the next 10 years, Medicaid stands to lose $1.5 trillion. But this is just the president's wish list.
We'll see how it goes. I think it's part of the budgetary process where you ask and then you negotiate.
I think this thing's going to go through some machinations over the next several months, but it doesn't surprise me that that's what came over. The president has been very clear about supporting the border, and I think it's also worth reminding everyone that that $5.7 billion wasn't a figure that the White House made up. That came from Border Patrol.
The president last month declared a national emergency, setting him up to use billions for the border wall.
On this vote, the yeas are 245, the nays are 182.
The House voted to reject the emergency.
The Senate will come to order.
And the Senate has the votes this week to do the same.
The president promises a veto, and neither chamber is likely to have the supermajority to override. It's likely the president's emergency will ultimately be decided by the courts. The president already faces lawsuits. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Up next, the National Catholic Register's Rome correspondent joins us in studio. And another media lawsuit expected for the coverage of the Kentucky Covington Catholic students. An Alabama man files a wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of his baby who was killed in an abortion. It is believed to be the first case of its kind in the United States. The state constitution recently recognized the rights of the unborn children. A student from a Catholic high school in Kentucky involved in a controversial viral video plans to sue CNN for $250 million. His lawyer told Fox News the suit seeks damages for what it calls vicious and direct attacks on the teenager caused by inaccurate reporting. There also is a lawsuit for the same dollar amount against the Washington Post, and the students were accused of harassing a Native American elder outside the Lincoln Memorial in January. Later videos provided more context. Finally tonight, preparations are underway for an upcoming synod about the Amazon. One group believes the topic of married priests could be on the agenda. Joining me now for analysis from Rome is Edward Pentin, Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register. Hello, Ed.
Hi, good to be on with you, Lauren.
It's so good to have you here. Now, Explain to me, this large lay contingent from Germany just came back from the Vatican, and they say, quote, more married priests are coming soon. What does that portend?
Well, this is a group, a very large group of lay Catholics in Germany. They're a very influential group, and they've just come back from the Vatican saying that not only that they think that more married priests are on the horizon, but also that there are other issues as well that they think are coming forth because of the abuse crisis. They say changes in sexual morality in society, and they say there's a greater openness in the Vatican for changes in these areas. So quite interesting and quite controversial comments from.
Well, would the issue of married priests be on the agenda for the synod on the Amazon? I mean, I think that's where there are fewer priests than in the rest of the world. It's such a large span of the continent.
Well, this is what they say, and this is the upcoming synod on the Amazon in October. And the argument is that because there are such a shortage of priests there, which some debate whether that's true or not, but if there are, then there are a group of people, and even the consultants of this synod are saying that there should be an allowance for married priests to be allowed in order to cater for that shortage of priests. And so people are seeing that perhaps as a way in the Latin Rite for more married priests than we have already.
You've covered the Vatican for how many years?
16 years.
16 years, and you were in Rome during the meeting on the child sex abuse that was convened by Pope Francis. All the bishops of the major top bishops came into town. What stood out to you?
I think primarily it was like a mini synod. You know, we have these synods about 3 weeks every few years, and this was very much compressed into 4 days. It was very helpful in the sense I think a lot of the bishops found it helpful to have bishops from all around the world together to discuss this issue. That hasn't happened before. So that was a positive side. On the negative side, people felt, well, things weren't tackled, there wasn't enough time, or there was deflection and things were ignored. So there was pros and cons of this, but it was an interesting event that I hadn't seen before.
I noticed that the Vatican submitted or released a digital press kit, 45 pages long, that had all of these different events throughout the Catholic Church history on addressing abuse. And they updated it for 2019.
That's right. Yes, it was a very thorough document for the press to know exactly what's going on. It's a very well handled event for the press. It was very well dealt with, a lot of information. Some say almost too much information for us.
Oh, come on, you're a journalist. Never too much information, Ed, please.
But it was, yes.
Tell me about other events that are on the horizon for the Holy Father. He is indefatigable.
Yes.
Indefatigable. Or
indefatigable.
I knew you'd get it. Your British accent always gets it right.
Yes, no, he's got a lot on the horizon, a lot of trips coming up. He's got trips to Romania, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Morocco's the next one coming up. And he's also got a new document coming out, the Apostolic Exhortation on the Synod last October. That's coming out on the 25th of March. And then we've got this big synod, of course, in October, and other things, no doubt surprises along the way.
No doubt. You are a busy man, and we're grateful that you're here, Ed.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ed Pentin, National Catholic Register. And for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, and that includes Ed, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.